If you don't know how you feel and why, you will run into all kinds of problems. You might behave in a way that you don't understand, or you might hurt others or yourself and regret it. If you don't have emotional clarity, you will be left unsatisfied when you meet people, when you interact with people. You will struggle to build deep, meaningful relationships. And it becomes much harder to make good decisions in life. So yeah, emotions are freaking important. Hi, I'm Patrick, and I have been struggling with identifying my emotions and talking about them my entire life. And I can tell you why. It's because I grew up in an environment where it wasn't really beneficial to talk about emotions. Like, it wasn't really common practice to say how you feel. It could even turn into something bad for me, because if I open up, it would be ignored. It could be very painful to be ignored, or it could be really turned against me in an argument. So I was loved as well. It's not that I had a completely bad childhood or anything like that. I really love my family. It was just that that's something we didn't really learn so much. Even today, it would be hard to actually open up because it's just not part of our communication, right? So when it came to emotions like shame or embarrassment, I feel these are way more complicated and complex emotions, and emotions that you don't want to admit so easily. This is something, it was really hard to express them. I never expressed them. So it took me really years to get behind that and get to a point where I can actually say how I feel and why. And it's, I'm still working on that. We all have to work on that our whole life. Because I'm still super surprised how often emotions run the show. How often I actually think, okay, I got it figured out. I know how I'm feeling, and then a moment later I'm like, oh wow, I actually felt something different. So it's a process, right? It's always trying to get behind them, and emotions can be tricky, and they're very, very. Emotions can be a very big part of deceiving ourselves of how we really feel. And take anger, for example. I've learned to identify anger and express it. That's very easy to express, right? But I often miss the emotion that was underneath this anger. But we talk about that in a moment. So, yeah, emotions are so messy. And they are always messy, but if we're not careful and trying to make sense of them, they will turn our life into a mess, and we have no control whatsoever. So it really helped me to find emotional clarity, to work on that, and I want to tell you what helped me, and maybe it can help you too. So the first thing I want to do is start with the big picture stuff. So we zoom out and look at the most important concepts and ideas that will make a huge difference. So if you get this down, then everything will become much easier. So the first thing is find comfort in vulnerability. Especially among men, there's this misconception that vulnerability makes us seem weak. And it might have been the case hundreds of years ago, but it's not the case anymore. At least that's not how we want to run society. Being vulnerable just means you're paying attention to yourself, and you're courageous enough to talk about how you feel. And this is where emotional clarity begins. It's being willing to feel, acknowledging that you feel, even if it feels messy or uncomfortable. And that includes all the parts that you want to hide, emotions that are really uncomfortable: doubt, fear, shame, embarrassment, insecurity. And that just doesn't mean you have to feel these emotions in front of others and be vulnerable towards others. That comes much later. The most important part is that you are vulnerable to yourself. So you just accept that you are a human being. You just sit down, you say, hey, Patrick, I'm feeling really embarrassed today. This one thing that happened where someone looked at me in a certain way, it made me feel embarrassed. That's why I got angry, something like that. The more you notice these things, the more you will be able to go even deeper behind the emotion that you notice, right? Often it's like a complex chain of emotions that we're actually feeling, and we just feel the last end of the chain. And this vulnerability really helps us to look beneath those emotions that we feel first. That might be deceiving, actually. They might not be the real emotion that is actually behind us. They might just be some kind of protector. What I'm talking about are primary emotions and secondary emotions. And it's really, really helpful to understand this concept. And let's look at an example. Imagine someone criticizes you in public, and your primary emotion would be something like embarrassment or shame, right? But what actually shows up is not embarrassment. You will not drop your head and feel ashamed. If you're more like me, you will become more defensive. There's something like an anger that will attack back, or at least it will fuel you in some way, even if you don't hit back, but you have some sort of defensiveness, right? This is when you're feeling the secondary emotion, that can be something like anger, frustration, defensiveness, something that feels more powerful, more empowering, right? It protects you. And it's definitely, we would probably think it's a better emotion than embarrassment. Embarrassment, it's harder to admit, to feel. And that's where it gets tricky. We usually act on these secondary emotions, and we don't really realize that there's something underneath that. So, of course, we can just pause and say, wait, what's really going on here? Why am I angry? But you won't find the answer if you're not willing to be really vulnerable with yourself. The second thing we need to do is to develop an emotional vocabulary. Because most of us have never learned to do this. We say things like, I feel bad, I feel weird, but those are not really emotions. I call that emotional laziness. We're halfway there, but then we just drop the ball and don't even try to score. And you might not know all the words, so that's why we want to build a vocabulary. So it's two things, right? We already know a bunch of words that we can use, but we don't use them because we don't know really how they tie to our emotional inner world. Maybe because we don't want to accept it. Maybe because we're not vulnerable enough yet. And then there are words we don't know yet, or we have never really used, so we don't really understand them, right? And we will get to that a bit later. For now, let's focus on words we probably already. What is up with my words? Anyway, so what I'm saying is we already know some words, but we don't really use them, right? I mean, how often do you actually say something like, I feel overwhelmed, disappointed, rejected, embarrassed, desperate, tense? You probably know these words, even if you're like me and you're not a native speaker. But do you actually have a personal connection to them? Can you recognize tension in your body? Can you sit with the disappointment? Can you identify it? Can you call it out? Can you tie that to a word like tense? Do you have an understanding of what it means to be desperate? To feel rejected? What does it even mean? How does it even feel in the body? The better your vocabulary and the more alive these words are, the better you can describe reality and also influence the reality around you. Because the better you use the words, the more precise they are, the more closer you are, the better you understand what's going on. Just imagine for a moment your friend invites you to a wine tasting. Your friend is a huge fan of wine, a big expert, knows everything about it, and you don't. And so you sit down, you have your first sip of wine, and all you can think of and all you can say is, this tastes weird, because you don't really know much about it. And then your friend goes, he drinks from the same wine, and he says, I'm picking up oak, a little plum, and some acidity on the finish. Same wine, different experience. Now we can discuss if this is like how you want to be. Do you? It might be a little cocky, depending on what your opinion is on wine tasting. But the point is, it's not about wine. The same thing goes for emotions. And if all you can say is, I feel bad, then it's hard to know what is really going on, But if you can say something like, I feel disappointed because I was really hoping to get that job, and now I didn't. And now I am back at square one. Then you are on your way to more clarity, and you can actually do something about your situation. And other people will understand you even better, because you can really identify what's going on, not just for yourself, but also for your friends and family. And if you want to build that skill even more, I would recommend you the book The Atlas of the Heart. It's written by Brené Brown, and it's so amazing. She's a researcher on emotions, especially vulnerability. And in this book, she's written many books, and they're all really good. But in this one, it's about emotions. So you will just read a whole list of different emotions. She will describe it in her way, sometimes mix in some research, in her own opinions and her own experiences. And it's just fantastic. I thought I know a little bit about emotions, but I still got surprised, and I found nuances and the differences between emotions I thought are similar or even the same. And it really helps, even though I've heard about these emotions, it just gives me more of knowledge and then more ways to search inside, because now I have, it's like you get a bigger torch and you have the knowledge that just helps you to light up inside and make some light and look deeper, if that makes sense to you. It really will help you to make a personal connection to your emotions and find the right words for it. Okay, now we have the high-level stuff out of the way, and I want to get a little bit more practical. I think it's quite simple in theory how to get emotional clarity, because it's just step number 1, identify the emotion, and step number 2, communicate the emotion. And to identify, I feel the most effective habit that you can build is journaling. It's one of the core skills. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm on and off with journaling. It's not that I can't tell you like, hey, journal, it's the best thing in the world. I do it sometimes. It really helps me every time I do. But, let's be honest. I want to be transparent here. I don't do it myself every day. I wish I would. So I'm telling you, do it. And especially if you want to talk about emotions, it's a very effective way to put things really into words, because writing is thinking. And writing about emotions is actually a very good way to process emotions and get clarity. What I did many years was just talking about my emotions, talking to friends, talking to partners, friends, girlfriends. I think that really helped me because I'm a talker. So I would just reflect for myself and then talk about it. Over the years, I got better at this. So it is a messy process, right? I cannot recommend you one system that works for everybody. So I'm going to be honest. I wish I would have been journaling my whole entire life. It probably would have been faster. But I was just reflecting and thinking for myself and talking about that. And that really, really got me very far. So, do whatever you think is important for you or works for you. And the second thing, obviously, is awareness in your body. So if you do meditation, if you do some mindfulness work, that is amazing. I feel doing yoga also raises your awareness for your body, for pain. If you ever done intense yoga classes, you know how it feels. When the stuff is coming up, your body hurts, everything is warm, and the stretch is too deep, and sometimes even emotions come up. So it really opens you up, and it makes you more sensitive to emotions and to what's going on inside. And the second thing is obviously communication. So we want to be able to identify just for us, right? Just to find clarity for us. But I feel in the moment we communicate, we get even more clarity. It's a little bit when I'm already writing it, even if it's just for myself, it's a form of communication, right? But what I did was I talked to people. So I did both at the same time. I identified my emotions while I'm talking about them. So it's not like so simple, crisp, clear to, 2 steps. Again, it's a messy thing. So by just talking, by communicating, by trying to wrap your head around it, what's going on actually, and you might even get some feedback from people. It is more like, you throw the ball in, you say like, hey, I'm feeling kind of, I don't know, maybe I'm disappointed about what's going on. I don't even know what's really happening. I just want to share this with you. Like, what you said to me last time, it's like it was just something irked me, something hurt me. And sometimes you don't even have to say the right word, right? It's in this moment when you communicate, it can become like a dance with your friend whom you trust, whom you open up to, right? You're being vulnerable, you're being courageous, and you say like, hey, listen, friend, I felt something, and it was hurtful when you said that thing to me last week. And I need to get this out of the way. I don't even know why I feel that way. Just let us figure out here what's going on. Maybe it was my expectations. Maybe something triggered me and it wasn't even your fault, That is stuff you have to figure out. And that often happens during a communication, during an exchange of emotions and perspectives. And in this moment, emotions can even change, That's why I'm saying it's so messy, because these emotions just, in one moment you think you're angry, in the next moment you think, you're embarrassed actually. In the next moment, it's completely gone, and you feel happy and connected with this person next to you because you just opened up you can sometimes open up in a conflict. You have become angry, then you recognize you're embarrassed or sad. Then you maybe even say that in this conflict. You're like, hey, I'm actually just disappointed. I'm actually sad right now. And you really just crack up. And it happened to me many times where I'm just like thinking I'm defensive. Then I'm actually pointing out what's going on inside me. And I start crying and open up to my partner. And I notice, wow, this is much better than fighting. I just need to be vulnerable to myself and to the other person. And suddenly there's a huge connection. Suddenly all that defense, all that battle mode is gone. I have to defend something. This person has to attack. There's often we create these barriers between each other. For what? Because we both have some story in our mind, some emotion that controls us in this moment, and a story that makes us think we're on the right side of things, and we need to do this and that. We need to push further. We need to defend us. We are not weak, whatever the narrative is. But as soon as we're willing to break through this, as soon as we're being vulnerable, we are dissolving these boundaries. We're dissolving this barrier, not boundaries, the barrier between us. And suddenly these two fractions become one. And we have a beautiful connection going on, a beautiful relationship that is being nurtured, And that is when the magic happens, really. I have noticed this in the last few years. If I'm really opening up like that, then everything's possible. Then friendships go deeper, relationships improve. And that's all I can say to you guys. If you're doing what I have been telling you about here in this video, if you're able to open up to yourself and then to identify what's going on, right? The more you're able to say okay, how do I really feel? What is really going on? Okay, right. So there's a feeling here. How can I label? How can I identify this feeling? Is this a rejection? Am I disappointed? What can this be, right? It doesn't even have to be correct, but just the journey alone will serve you, and it will create this vocabulary that works for you. And then you're able to communicate that, right? Then you just have to get vulnerable outside of yourself, vulnerable to the person you are talking to, and then find the right words. But if you have done this with yourself and trying to find the words, you have been written them down, you wrote them down, or whatever, then it's just a matter of throwing it out there, and then you have this beautiful dance of figuring out what's going on. I hope that video helped you. Please let me know if you like that kind of video, and if you have any questions, let me know in the comments, and please subscribe to my channel if you like that kind of stuff. I would love to see you again, and have a great day. See you. Bye-bye.